Yeah, hello. Thank you very much that we can be here today. I'm Jana Kuhlmann. I work at the BUND, a German NGO for the protection of environment and nature. And I'm Janine Corduan, and I work as a spokesperson for sustainable management at the BUND. We're excited to talk to you about the chemical industry today. I know we talk a lot about the transformation of the coal industry and a lot about the transformation of the automotive industry, but I think the discourse on the chemical industry, which is actually one of the most energy intensive in Germany, I don't really see it a lot, and so this year we published a paper on this, and also we hope that with that and with this talk we can bring you closer to this industry and to push this discourse more and maybe make you more interested in the topic. So chemicals are in all of the things all around us. It might be the plastics, the pellets that the industry produces, or maybe it's the softeners, the plasticizers, or maybe it's flame retardants in your computers. All of those are products of the chemical industry. And there is a concept of the planetary limits from the Stockholm Resilience Center, and they think that there is a safe amount or a safe operating space for the Earth, and they always look at all of the sectors and whether they have exceeded that. And last year they published that actually for these novel entities, is what they call them, which are all of the human-made chemicals, this safe operating space has been exceeded by far. And why would that be? That's because all around us there are lots of microplastics and all of those forever chemicals, as they're called, PFAS. And also because we have so many and so many different ones of those chemicals and produce them yearly, and the production is increasing every year, that the risk potential can't even really be assessed reliably and therefore dampened. And that's why in the environment space we talk about three of those planetary crises. It's not just the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, but we also have a contamination, pollution crisis and a resource crisis. And as we already said, in September we published this study, this paper on the black box of the chemical industry, and we're gonna push you through this a bit for now. And at first we wanna have to clear up what is this chemical industry. Some people think about the pharmaceutical industry there, and maybe it's the industry of pesticides, but there's also fertilizer in there in the chemical industry. There are so-called mass chemicals, which are all of the chemicals that are produced in very large quantities, which is, for example, the base products for the plastics industry, those pellets. There are also special chemicals, for example, additives for plastics, plasticizers for colors, but also those forever chemicals, those PFAS, which you use to impregnate clothing to make it watertight. And so what exactly is the chemical industry within that? I'm going to show that within the next couple of slides. And so in the beginning there are the raw resources, the fossil resources that the industry uses. And those go to the crude oil refineries, which actually doesn't count as a chemical industry. The chemical industry is only what is in the orange box here, which actually uses the products that come from the crude oil refineries and then process them within this chemical industry. And, for example, produce these plastic pellets or PFAS and use them to create, for example, packaging, or maybe produce building materials, or the automotive industry or textile industry or whatever. So let's start from the beginning. In the beginning, it uses raw materials to produce their products. In the left here, you can see the energy usage of the chemical industry, and it is split up by what do they need in terms of resources. For example, crude oil that is used to create plastics, which is actually quite a lot more than the right bar here, which is all of the energy that is used in the processes, for example, to operate the plant and so on. And there you can see on the right how does the crude oil get to those refineries. There are, for example, pipelines and harbors where it gets delivered. In the second step, the crude oil goes to the refineries. These are all of the refineries we have in Germany. And what I want to show you here is that those refineries are splitting up the crude oil, and they are mostly producing gasoline and diesel, and only a small part of that actually is able to be used as raw materials for the chemical industry. Actually, in most places it's a lot less, and this shows how much the chemical industry is depending on, or at least in relation to, the usage of fossil petrochemicals for transport, such as gasoline and diesel. And once those aren't needed anymore, this chemical industry is going to have a big problem as well. So they have a big interest in us continuing to use these fossil gases. And then from the refineries, the products pass on to those chemical parks we have in Germany. There is a distribution map here for those. There are a lot of them in North Rhine-Westphalia, some of them around Frankfurt, but also in Lower Saxony. In Saxony. And so we looked at a couple of plastic products, for example, and these are polypropylene and polyethylene and PET that are used a lot for various packaging products, and where those are produced and in what quantities. There you can see that North Rhine-Westphalia is very big, but also Bavaria and Saxony. And within our study we have a lot more data. This is more of an example, and you're very welcome to request those information from us to see what kind of industry might be around your area. For example, here I have some data from around Hamburg. There's, for example, Brunsbüttel, one plant. We can also give you those maps. There are the pipelines that are connecting all of those plants, and what companies are producing where, in what quantities, and what they are producing. And for example, here in Stade as well, all of the things that are produced there. And if you maybe read about, okay, they're producing bisphenol A here, what does that even mean? That might not be common knowledge to everyone. We created a nice overview that we want to show you quite quickly. There's a small example here, for example, where you can look at how all of these things are coming together. For example, bisphenol A here, what chemicals is it made from? You can find out, and you can also find out that it's mostly used for polycarbonate, which is a see-through plastic, which is used in, for example, these two products. And that way you can understand more what those interplays are between the various processes and materials. And you can also see that what the German production capacities are in that field. Okay, so I want to talk about the energy use of the industry a little bit and compare it to other industries. As I already said, there's on the right side the bar here, all of the things we need as raw resources for the industry, and then on the right side we have the energy for the processes, the so-called ending energy. And if we only look on the right side, then we can see that the German energy industry is actually one of the most energy-intensive industries in Germany. And it actually takes up more than both of the following industries of cement and iron and steel. And so who are the most energy consumptive companies? Of course, there's the big BASF Ludwigshafen chemical plant, but also BP Gelsenkirchen or the chem park near Dormagen in North Rhine-Westphalia. And if you look at the entire energy usage, which also contains the minerals, the crude oil, then the chemical industry in Germany actually uses more primary energy than Denmark and Ireland together. Their full primary energy, including all of the industry, actually our chemical industry uses more than those two countries together. And even if you compare it to the German households, it's actually more than half of the German households' energy and gas usage. And that's actually 3/4 of the energy usage of the industry. And so we're going to look at the various products that actually use a lot of energy, and that actually shows us that the packaging and fertilizer production are actually one of the most energy-using things. And also we looked at packaging a bit more, because if we want to look at maybe a recycling industry there or return industry, then we can see that actually 20% of the usage of the chemical industry is actually used for these single-use plastics. And just these single-use plastics that we produce in the chemical industry in Germany, that's actually more than the entire country of Slovenia uses. But also other more problematic things like bisphenol A and melamine are produced, which actually are hormonal toxins or might be carcinogenics, are still produced a lot, and it's still legal to produce all of these chemicals that are actually illegal within the EU and that we export to other countries.
And is the German chemical industry really suffering? And they wrote an urgency letter to the Chancellery, an open letter, and said under the slogan, "Stop deindustrialization." And we can see since 2009 an increase in revenue of 80%. And it's true, you can see the production is decreasing in 2022, but you can also see that it's a cyclic production in chemical industry, so there's nothing special really at this moment. So I can tell you what the industry is planning. And of course, the industry is under some pressure, not because of us alone, but also because of us. But if the industry, the chemical industry, really talks about new scenarios, how it wants to transform itself until 2050 and so on and so forth, then it uses lots of nice phrases, and I'll show some of you to you, and I want to put them into context. So renewable resources, only renewable resources, non-fossil resources, and want to make a cycle economy, come to net zero and zero emissions and climate gas neutrality. Climate neutrality is a word that almost every packaging uses that, recyclable and organic, and it all sounds very like a golden time that we are living in, and the chemical industry is on board with that to transform itself. And I really looked at the port of Antwerp as one of the spots where fracking gas, liquefied natural gas arrives, and where's a chemical plant, a chemical park. And if you really look at that website, the port of Antwerp, what are they planning? And CO2 capture is planned there, and CO2 needs wants to be captured and transported and stored and also used. And what I found very interesting was the different actors that you can find in these visions of the future. There's ExxonMobil and BASF and INEOS and all the big fossil players all together, and they all want to contribute to that the port of Antwerp becomes climate neutral. And what's another scenario of the BCI, the Federation of the Chemical Industry, the German federal industry, is a very nice graph here. The climate gas emissions will be reduced by up to 100%, so down to zero by 2050. And the assumptions in these predictions are really very problematic, and we really have to question them. And it is assumed that the resources are produced a little bit less, so minus 0.5% per year, and special chemicals will be increased by about 1% per year. And in these scenarios, it is also assumed that all renewable electricity goes to the chemical industry. And CCUS, it sounds really nice. It's part of all scenarios. The requirement by new renewable resources will be used for use CO2 and label CO2 as a new resource, and it's not really a problem. We all need the CO2 and we create new products from that. So it's carbon capture, storage and use. CCUS is a central element in all these scenarios. And it is also assumed that all renewably available biomass goes to the chemical industry. And I'll talk about that a bit later, what that's supposed to be. And then there's chemical recycling is a phrase that is used in all the scenarios and has a big part there. It's a very energy-intensive process to create new plastics, and it is assumed that we'll have huge amounts of green hydrogen to be used by the chemical industry. And if we really look at all this, then we say, if we analyze this as the BUND, we only see technical fixes. We don't see any reduction, we don't see a transformation to a renewable economy, and Germany is really a European champion of plastics production. A large part is produced in Germany, and 40% of this market is single-use packaging, so almost half of that. And there is nothing about reusable in this scenario, but everything shall be replaced just on a one-to-one basis. We only have techno fixes, only technical solutions that are supposed to bring us to 0% emissions. So what does that mean if we really create these scenarios? So there are different scenarios, but some are assuming that the industry will use the 11-fold times on electricity. That's more renewable energy than the federal government really plans to install in all of Germany. And I would really remind you of that we won't have infinite renewable energy at any time. We are living on a restricted planet, and even renewable energy is restricted by the use of resources, and we have to talk about who can get how much energy and how can they be used, and we can't assume infinite renewable energy. So what's sustainably available biomass? What is that? So bioplastic production shall be increased, and that is depending on the scenario. This just grows, and so it could be sugarcane from Brazil, or PET bottles like this one can, for example, be made from sugarcane. And is that sustainable? We say no, it really isn't. I live in Brandenburg, I know what a monoculture is, but Brazil and sugarcane monocultures are another scale altogether. They are much bigger. We have lots of pesticides and fertilizer. We have resource consumption, and we really don't have all these areas. And we know that fertilizer requires lots of oil and gas, and we have the pesticides, and it's not really sustainable biomass. We can't really assume that this really will be produced sustainably. And then we have genetically modified corn from the USA, and that's one of the potential resources that could be used for producing plastics. So bioplastic, organic plastic is maybe compostable and biodegradable. It really sounds very nice, but biodegradation of plastic doesn't really work as well as the industry says. But it's also we say that we can't really produce that amount of organic plastics. If they could really biodegrade, what they really don't, it's still really just we just turn them into waste, and it all goes back into the air, even in biodegradation. And chemicals recycling is also something that is really pushed, and it is part of the coalition contract. And these technologies really use a multiple of energy compared to mechanical recycling. And mechanical recycling uses a lot less energy, and we really have problematic byproducts like pyrolysis cokes that nobody talks about, but it is created in quantities, and we have massive loss of materials. And the competition with mechanical recycling is really most probable. And if you really have very clean sorted plastic sorts, and then we really it would work, but we still had large losses. But we need these kinds of plastics from mechanical recycling. But we have big players and who really want to become a competition to the local mechanical recyclers, and the chemical industry really wants to use chemical recycling not for special things, for mattresses where it is really useful that mattresses aren't just incinerated but are chemically recycled. That is useful. And that would be okay for that case. But for packaging, for example, the chemical industry wants to establish chemical recycling, and that's really a waste of energy and resources. So CCUS was mentioned as a term, and it's to capture carbon from the air or from deposition in industrial plants. CO2 should be deposited, and I would explain that soon. And then, of course, together with green hydrogen, we could make new plastics, and that doesn't really work, and it really won't scale to the amounts that are proposed, and it would require huge amounts of green hydrogen. So all in all, these are just technical fixes, techno fixes that we really have to question. And I really want to tell you that CO2 is really a lazy gas. And I show you CO2 in a little picture, how much resource and research money goes into that. It doesn't change the structure of CO2. We just have these double bonds, and it is extremely energy intensive to change water or CO2, for example, to make new plastics from CO2. And it always requires huge amounts of energy to use CO2 for that. So what does the industry plan again, besides the nice scenarios? It plans a carbon capture infrastructure. CCS, what is that? Carbon capture and storage. It was on the agenda, but then vanished, and now it's back, unfortunately. It's the chemical deposition, liquefaction, transport, and deposition of CO2, the compression into landfills under the land or under the sea, and a huge pipeline, 5,000 to 6,000 kilometers CO2 pipeline, was created in Germany and is going to link the industry areas of chemical, steel, cement, lime industry with glass, paper, and CO2, and a connection of CO2 transit to neighboring countries is possible. For example, coal power plants plants in Poland could be connected, perhaps, which of course is really very dangerous because we really don't want any coal-fired power plants anymore. But every place of these techno-fixes is, from the point of view of the BUND is very energy intensive. It creates emissions, it doesn't reduce them, and it is really environmentally very unfriendly. For example, 10 to 50% of the emissions, so almost half of the emissions are still emitted, and the storage and deposition is really a lot less than in laboratory tests. If we really look at the actual deposition rates, we have to be honest, and it can be up to half of that are still emissions that are still being emitted. And I can show you some grotesque numbers really about scaling. If we talk about the capacity of CCS, that's about 7 megatons per year, but the global total emissions are 37,000 million tons per year. And that shows how little and how small that potential really is for CCS. But we talk a lot, unfortunately, about CCS, but you really only have to look at these numbers, and then you can see how little effect this could possibly have from our point of view. CCS is really dangerous, and the discussion about that as well. It really has to do with the question, where should we put the CO2? Because the North Sea floor looks like a Swiss cheese, and it's really hasn't been proven that CO2 can really be would really stay there. And you can't do a little bit CCS. It's just like waste incineration plants. In the vicinity of waste incineration plants, there are 50 kilograms more waste per person compared to places where there are no incineration plants. It's like streets and traffic. If we create infrastructure, then they will have to be used for decades. And so that's why we think this is dangerous. If we're planning this pipeline network will be created with overcapacity. It's like LNG, for example. If we build huge infrastructure, then they will have to be used in the future. And this is really the danger. And CCS was never developed for climate protection. And for 100 years, there are experiments and research about CCS, but it was always used to create and to extract even more oil and gas from the ground. It was never intended for climate protection, but just to extract more oil and gas. So CCS is new, but also an old model for companies. But we think that all these discussions about these technical fixes are really sidetracking from real transformation. And to sell CCS as climate protection is really a fairy tale. And what we also see that the millennia-long responsibility, and no one in this room can be responsible for that, but what happens in case of a disaster, and this is all has to be borne by the society, but the companies can still use their old gas reserve as climate protection, and they make their profits, and the society has to bear the responsibility.
Okay, and this is where we brought some more information from a network that we work with, and you can see that together with the burning of waste and the steel industry, and lots of them actually have interest in advancing this kind of infrastructure. And another thing that can very clearly be seen is this CO2 circular economy. We really don't think of this as a circular economy. There's a lot of energy and hydrogen used. It's really leaky and it doesn't really work. All of these circles really look nice, but all of the things that the industry are planning there is something that is really energy intensive and really only working with linear industries. And why are we producing 40% single-use plastics for packaging? And I don't think we need to build this kind of network if we just establish a more reuse-focused industry. And this is really unclear and insecure. And actually, a lot of these companies have a big interest in just establishing and keeping the status quo. For example, BASF is working on a chemical deposition method for CO2 that they will be producing the technology for. And I don't know how they are integrated into this kind of network, but we really have some big players that we would be giving a lot of power there that are currently the only ones that really talk about how the future of the chemical industry will look, even though we might have some better ideas there. So what would we need instead? We are very clearly saying that we need a reduction of production, a real circular economy that uses less resources, that wastes less resources, less products that are just kept around and that can stay around in an energy-effective industry and economy. We need less forever chemicals, which is what my colleague explained earlier with those PFAS. We need safe and sustainable by design chemicals. We need a strong law and governing body around this, and we need the chemical industry to take responsibility, which means that they should finance a reuse-based economy, and they should have to pay taxes on base chemicals. And we are demanding a real defossilization of these raw resources. Of course, the CCS are not defossilized, and the oil and gas industry is still running with a lot of emissions, and we really need a lot lower use of hydrogen and power. And even those we won't have an infinite amount of, and that's why we have to be more careful in the use of them. And a real transformation can only be done with sufficiency and post-growth. And so this sufficiency means we need less to just make less, and we also do need the recycling, of course. And we will, of course, use some renewable resources, but hopefully much less than we're currently using. And the limitless use of these fossil resources really needs to be reduced. But that won't be enough. Recycling has its limits. I think for the nerds of you, I have added the word dissipation here, which in this case means that in every recycling circle, we are using and losing material. We can't just solve this crisis with recycling, because for every cycle of recycling we have to add new material, and we have to keep those products around for longer. We need a recyclable, a reduction of the use of those resources, a sustainable reduction, and that won't work if we continuously increase production, which will always mean that we are overusing resources. And if we think about a more sustainable reduction of this resource use, and we need the entry into a post-growth society, which of course would mean adjusting one's lifestyle and the societal lifestyle as well. And this of course needs the backing from politics and of course the entire society. We need a societal orientation for this sufficiency and post-growth. And we want a law that for protecting the use of resources and capping that within the planetary limits. And we also want an orientation toward the common good. And a view on what can be produced in the future, and we want a more decentralized production with a lower use of energy and resources, and all of this industry not only being in the hands of the big players. You can find more information in this great study. We also have a short form paper with only 8 pages and a collection. And also, if you're interested to look up what toxic chemicals might be in the things you use every day, I can only recommend the ToxFox app. It can show you not just all of those things, but it can also show you various protests and toxins that various manufacturers produce, to show that it's important to us what kinds of toxins this industry is mixing into our things, and you can really easily demand those things there. And this is where we thank you very much for listening, and if we can't explain your questions in the Q&A round right now, you can also reach us on the Congress on our sofas.
Very nice, thank you very much. Bits and Trees people really are very well prepared. And we have a few minutes for Q&A. Please go to the microphones and also ask questions. First from the internet. Yes, thank you very much from the online community. Thank you very much for the talk and your engagement. The first questions, was this study asked for by someone in particular, or were there already consequences for economy and politics?
Yes, so we, the BUND, gave this study into production and paid for it, and the timing was actually quite interesting. That when we did that in September, this was 1 week before the Chancellor's office with Olaf Scholz actually invited the chemical industry into a chemical summit, and that's actually where we were able to, even though we weren't invited to that summit, show the study, and even though there is not a lot of a big part of the society that is involved in that, we can show that we are contributing, and it was actually noticed, but we haven't really registered any real change from it yet, but we hope that the general civil discourse on this topic will hopefully increase the pressure on the topic. And I can also add that we are also talking a lot to various politicians and decision makers, and actually how much oil and gas is in all of these products is usually always surprising them, but has never really led to our demands for more reuse as a more normal thing and less packaging. It would actually be done in terms of legislation. We are trying, but it's not easy.
Okay, thank you. Microphone 2, please. I found it very interesting on one of the slides with the chemical recycling for packaging. Would you say that chemical recycling is worse than thermal recycling, so incineration? So if the packaging isn't really clean, separated by materials, then it cannot be used in mechanical recycling and would end in thermal recycling. What would be better?
That's actually a very good question. The proponents of chemical recycling say that we are taking all of the dirty things and all of the mixed plastics and maybe also what's going into cement recycling, but it isn't really proven that they are actually doing that with an efficient use of energy and really producing valuable products from that. So the industry still has to really prove that to us. And I already kind of said that lots of different products, for example, mattresses, that's where that should be established, but not really for single-use plastics. It's really a big waste of resources. We would need like these monomaterials should all be reusable, and this should be going into mechanical recycling, and it primarily it's different product design really. And the proponents of chemical recycling will usually say that we can actually do that, but we don't really see it.
Thank you. Another question from the internet, please. One question is, where does the CO2 emission really come from? Is that the pure energy usage, or is it also the chemical processes, and in what proportion?
Yeah, so I had this little image with the two bars. I'm not going to scroll back to it, which shows the energy demand for the resources and for the processes. And if you looked at it, really what exactly it is, then we saw that most of it is actual fossil. Actually, most of it emits CO2. The resource part is the larger bar. That, of course, is what happens with those things, and you have to ask what happens with the resulting plastics as well, right? Because of this, all of this carbon is embedded into the plastics, and then once that is burned, of course, we have the emissions there. So is it reused over 50 years, or is it even repaired, or which would mean that you would have less CO2 emissions? But in the end, you have it on actually both sides.
Okay, the last question for this session. There's another session about bits and trees, but please. There's another view. Do you have numbers about what the industry pays for this electricity? Because I know that it's not really easy. I know that professionally it was about 600 terawatt hours of electricity that were used.
No, we don't really have any data on that. We only know that they actually asked for the industry power tariff, and this is unfortunately also one of the things that bothers us at the BUND, is that these reduced tariffs for the industry are offered to lots of industry players, and that these massive users, of course, usually have different contracts with the power distribution facilities.
Okay, then I would say Jana and Janine, thank you very much, and please another round of applause.